On January 17, 2014, officers entered the house of 52-year-old Harold Sasko and discovered his bloody body. During the investigation, it turned out that an 18-year-old girl was living with him, who everyone thought was his stepdaughter, but she was not at the scene. When the officers found out what had happened in that house, the entire community was in shock. Sarah McLin was born on July 9, 1994. She grew up in Topeka, the capital of Kansas in the USA. For several years of her upbringing, she did not attend school and was homeschooled. Sarah grew up as a naive and shy child, but at the same time very friendly and attentive. She had a younger brother whom she always took care of and an older sister with whom she was very close. When Sarah was still a child, a neighbor began to abuse her, leading to severe trauma that affected her life. The girl started having nightmares in which she relived the violence and woke up in the middle of the night in panic. Stress and fear did not allow her to live in peace. Then Sarah started running away and drinking alcohol. Because of this, her parents decided to take her to a psychologist to help her process the trauma. However, the situation did not improve, and things at home got worse. Around this time, her parents divorced, which had a significant impact on her. According to Sarah, her parents' divorce made her feel unloved at home. Over time, she completely lost contact with her father, and her relationship with her mother became increasingly conflict-ridden. Sarah felt out of place at home and wanted to leave as soon as possible. She apparently needed a job to leave home. At the age of 14, Sarah started working in a pizzeria. The owner of this establishment was a middle-aged man named Harold Sasko. At first glance, Harold was a successful and upright person. At that time, he owned 3 pizzerias and was a devout Christian. But his employees had a different version. They said Harold was a pervert. One of Terry David's employees, the manager of one of the establishments, said Harold asked him to hire only young, attractive girls. Apparently, Terry didn't like this, and every time he hired a girl, he warned her to be cautious of her boss. But when Sarah was hired and received this warning from Terry, she was very naive and concluded that the guy was exaggerating. When the girl started working at the pizzeria, Harold began communicating with her and gradually gained her trust. He even picked her up from school, drove her to work, bought her things, asked her to tell him what was happening, and even told her to see him as a father. But he also told her not to tell her mother about what was happening. So Sarah listened to him, and her family never found out about this relationship. Parallel to her relationship with Harold, whom she began to see as a father, Sarah experienced another rape at the age of 16, this time by a close friend. According to the girl, they were relaxing when her friend pushed her onto a table, the table broke, and he raped her and even burned her back with a cigarette. All of this obviously affected Sarah, who, thanks to psychotherapy, had already managed to cope with the violence she had been exposed to as a child. But with this new episode, the ghosts of the past returned to her life. Sarah returned to psychotherapy, and this time she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Stress and depression increased to the point that the teenager attempted suicide. Sarah was then hospitalized in a psychiatric clinic for some time, where she received therapy and medication for rehabilitation. When Sarah left the hospital, she continued to take medication and see a psychologist. It began to help her cope with everything she had gone through. However, the situation at home was very tense, and she couldn't stand the atmosphere there. When the girl was hospitalized, she no longer worked at Harold's Pizzeria, but they stayed in touch. He picked her up from school, took her to lunch, and asked about her life. A 50-year-old man saw an opportunity when Sarah was very vulnerable and decided to take advantage of it. During this time in Sarah's life, Harold repeatedly suggested she move in with him. He was single, had no children or obligations, and lived alone. Besides, his business was going very well, and he told the girl that he could help her financially. Harold even offered to finance her education. But Sarah repeatedly refused. She didn't want to move in with Harold, even though she desperately wanted to leave home because the arguments with her mother were daily and often very intense. Finally, in 2012, when she graduated from school and turned 17, Sarah accepted Harold's offer and moved in with him. Then it seemed to her that this was the beginning of a new life and that with this person she would have everything she needed. And indeed, Harold was initially like that. He bought Sarah everything she needed, enrolled her in college, provided her with food, a roof over her head, and asked for nothing in return. He bought her gifts and was very attentive to what she needed and wanted. But when Sarah turned 18, everything changed. At that point, Harold began making inappropriate propositions to her. He invited Sarah to have sex in return for everything he did for her, which she obviously refused. In the months she lived with Harold, they pretended to be stepfather and stepdaughter to avoid misunderstandings and misinterpretations of their relationship. Sarah never thought this man would ask her to have sex with him. According to the girl's mother, she was never okay with her daughter moving in with Harold, but Sarah never listened to her. Several people close to Harold and Sarah said she even called him Dad, and the fact that he asked her for intimacy surprised them greatly. When Sarah refused, the man became very angry. He hinted that there would be no home for her if she didn't have sex with him. Harold also knew that Sarah had problems in the past and had already started consuming alcohol and illegal substances at a very young age. The man took advantage of this and offered her various forbidden substances. When Sarah was under the influence of drugs, Harold tried to have sex with her and even raped her several times. Every time the girl refused, the man became angrier, more aggressive, and crueler towards her. Then Harold wrote Sarah a list of all the things he had bought her and explained that she couldn't leave the house until she repaid all the money. He manipulated her by threatening to sue her for not paying her debts if she tried to run away. By this time, Sarah had a steady job, but Harold withheld her pay, and her income wasn't enough to cover everything Harold demanded. The expenses included 2 expensive cosmetic surgeries that Sarah underwent at Harold's urging. One was a nose job, and the other was buttock implants. The second surgery caused her such pain that she took medication for several months. For these 2 surgeries, Harold demanded $16,000 from Sarah. In addition to all these payments for gifts, the man also demanded payment from the girl for the months she lived in his house. Sarah couldn't return home to her mother because Harold subjected her to psychological violence and manipulated her by saying that no one needed her at home and that she would definitely not be accepted there. Her behavior completely changed from a quiet, naive girl with a very good heart to a very aggressive girl who didn't want to talk to anyone and defended herself at the slightest remark. According to Sarah, over time, her thoughts changed, and she began to feel the desire to kill. First, she went to a pet store and bought rabbits. When she got home, she killed them with a knife, skinned them, and then ate them. Harold witnessed all of this but said nothing to her. Moreover, he laughed at her. When Sarah wasn't at work, she was always under the influence of illegal substances, alcohol, or in a very bad mood because of everything she had gone through at Harold's house. Eventually, Sarah started taking antidepressants because she thought they might help her. Weeks passed, and they had no effect, so she switched to stronger ones, but they didn't help either. This plunged the girl into a spiral of self-destruction, and it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened in that house. On January 17, 2014, police officers arrived at Harold's house. His colleagues reported him missing after he didn't show up at the pizzeria for several days and couldn't be reached. The officers rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered. Then they decided to look through the windows to see if there was anything inside. One of them managed to see a man's body in a pool of blood, and the officers broke down the door to enter the house. When they entered, they found several empty beer cans next to Harold's body. Harold's body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, and it was determined that he died from multiple stab wounds to the neck. Additionally, an analysis of the beer cans was conducted, and traces of sleeping pills were found in them. The police knew that Sarah lived with Harold in the house, and when they arrived, they found her phone and, knowing her age, concluded that she was missing. They thought someone might have taken the girl against her will. Later, the officers learned that Sarah had called work and said she would be absent for several days due to the death of a relative. They spoke with the girl's family, and her mother said that Sarah had tried to contact her grandmother. The police traced the calls and found that they had been made from different grocery stores. After investigating where these stores were located, they concluded that Sarah was traveling from Kansas to Texas. They also checked the surveillance footage of the stores and found that it was indeed Sarah who called and that she was alone. At that moment, it became clear to them that she had not been kidnapped, and she became the main suspect in Harold's murder. On January 25, 2014, 11 days after the murder, the 19-year-old Sarah was found sleeping in Harold's car by a park ranger. This happened around 1:30 a.m. in Everglades National Park. When they woke her up to arrest her, they found that she had a loaded weapon. A search of the car revealed another gun, illegal substances, an axe, and 2 knives. At the time of her arrest, Sarah was not taken to Kansas but left in Florida, where she was interrogated by several investigators. The girl did not resist and did not try to make up a story. She quickly admitted that she had indeed killed Harold and fled the scene. Sarah said that this man had been harassing her and that she saw this as the only way to get rid of him. The girl told everything in detail. According to her, a few days before the incident, when Harold was not home, she went to the pharmacy and bought a pack of sleeping pills. On January 14, the day before the man's body was discovered, she had a day off. Harold started renovating the house and asked Sarah to bring him a beer. The girl said that at that moment she realized this was her chance. She knew that Harold would not only drink beer but would also want more. After the third can of beer, Sarah started mixing the pills into Harold's drink. She said she waited until the third can so he wouldn't notice the strange taste. While Harold asked for more beer, she continued giving him the pills, totaling 5. This medication, combined with alcohol, caused Harold to lose consciousness. Then, Sarah quickly tied his hands and feet. According to her, Harold woke up at some point for about a minute and mumbled something. Sarah didn't understand him well but said she felt very sorry for him at that moment but was determined to carry out her plan. She took out a knife and stabbed him several times in the neck, almost decapitating him. When the girl realized that Harold was dead, she took his blood and wrote the word freedom on the bathroom wall. Then, Sarah washed her hands, took a shower, changed clothes, and took money, a tablet, and Harold's car and left the house. She said she left her phone behind so it couldn't be tracked and believed that something had happened to her as well. The girl drove towards Texas, but when she arrived, she didn't like it there because it was too cold at night, so she drove to Florida. Along the way, Sarah mostly slept in the car and stopped on the highway to rest. When she arrived in Florida, she contacted a local tattoo artist, James Baker, to get a tattoo. This wasn't Sarah's first tattoo. She already had the phrase "Only God can judge me" on her shoulder. For her second tattoo, Sarah chose a quote from a book, "Beware of the dark pit at the bottom of our hearts. In its icy black depths live strange, perverse creatures that are best left alone." Sarah hoped that by cooperating with the police and telling the whole story of Harold's violence, they would be lenient and reduce her sentence. However, the police decided not to do so. They portrayed Sarah as a real psychopath and Harold as a calm Catholic who only wanted to help the girl. During the interrogation, Sarah told one of the officers that during the fits of rage she experienced in Harold's house, she felt the urge to kill. Therefore, the prosecutors claimed that Sarah killed Harold because she wanted to know what it felt like to kill a man and not because he was cruel to her. The police also found a message on Sarah's phone in which Harold apologized to her for forcing her to have sex with him, but none of this was shown to the jury in the first trial. All evidence of Harold's abuse of Sarah was ignored to bring the girl to trial. In February 2014, the trial against Sarah began. The lawyer did not want to use all of Harold's abuses against the girl as they were not considered in the indictment. He decided to try another risky strategy. The man suggested to Sarah to prove her innocence due to a mental illness, claiming she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. According to Sarah, the lawyer told her that she would be released this way. According to the defense, Sarah developed several alter egos to cope with the abuse she endured. One of these personalities was Vanessa, a fragile and vulnerable girl who was afraid of dying to escape Harold. But another personality named Lisa, who was very bad, decided to kill the man to prevent this. Then there was Mila, who had deep memories of abuse. The lawyer argued that all these personalities represented the so-called system and that the real Sarah disappeared when she was raped by a friend. Sarah expressed remorse for her actions and apologized to Harold's family, but her defense strategy was unsuccessful. Neither the judge nor the jury believed a single word. The prosecution had another carefully crafted story. They focused on the fact that Sarah killed Harold just to find out what it was like to kill a person. They stated that the sexual relations, despite Harold's pressure, were consensual and not part of the violence. Since the defense had already addressed the issue of trauma and what Sarah had experienced, the prosecution declared that all these episodes from the past were not true, not considering the fact that Sarah had undergone psychological treatment related to everything she had gone through. They continued to portray Harold as a calm religious man who only wanted to help a misguided teenager, whom she took advantage of. The prosecutors even stated that the illegal substances were not brought home by Harold but were bought by Sarah herself, although there was no evidence of this. The only thing they could prove 100% was that Sarah had already planned Harold's murder. When they checked her phone, they found several messages to her sister saying she had already found a way to get rid of this person forever. This made the prosecution clear to the judge that the crime was premeditated, and they therefore demanded a first-degree murder conviction. To further confirm this hypothesis, Sarah's browser history was checked, revealing that she had been researching the vulnerabilities of the neck and methods of attacking a person for a month. On September 4, 2015, 21-year-old Sarah was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years. After the verdict, all information about Harold's abuse and the witnesses that the prosecution did not allow was made known to the media, and the case attracted great attention. It was found that most information about the conditions of the relationship between Sarah and Harold was hidden from the jury for unknown reasons, either to preserve Harold's image as a quiet religious man in the eyes of many or because the prosecution simply wanted to achieve the harshest possible punishment for the girl. However, in the end, all of this attracted more and more public attention. In 2021, Sarah made a deal with the prosecutor, which managed to reduce her sentence from 50 to 25 years. The girl is still sentenced to life imprisonment but can apply for release after 25 years.
Love is a beautiful feeling about which books, music, and films are written. However, when it is the perverse love of a sick person, it can be so destructive that it ruins many fates. The cunning of some villains knows no bounds. The perpetrator can hide so well that until the last moment it is not clear whether they are crying, genuinely grieving, or shedding crocodile tears and rejoicing in the bloody triumph. The incident we are discussing today occurred in St. Paul Park, Minnesota, USA, half an hour's drive from Minneapolis. A close-knit community of about 5,000 people lived there. During the holidays, residents transformed the town into a luminous paradise where every decorated house smelled warm and cozy. The couple, Daniel and Deborah Larson, also lived here. On February 24, 1988, their daughter Christine was born. She was the youngest of the couple's 4 children, and before her birth, the couple had taken an 8-year break. The older children helped their parents and took care of Christine. From the beginning, she stood out among the other children due to her activity and agility. Christine had always been like that and maintained this joy for life until her last breath. In 2004, at the age of 16, she began a relationship with her boyfriend, Zachary Matthews. The couple's relationship developed well. In 2006, she had a son named Darren. During her pregnancy, Christine moved in with her boyfriend to her parents' house to receive support from her mother and loved ones. She spent almost all her free time at the Larson home and they became very close. For Christine, the boy was everything. Her life revolved around motherhood and housework. Zachary seemed to be a loving and caring father. However, after a few months of living together, they felt they wanted to become more independent and moved out of the parents' house. He himself grew up in a difficult family with an alcoholic father who regularly turned to drink and constantly abused his child morally and physically. Nevertheless, his difficult childhood did not turn Zachary evil. He was determined to build healthy relationships and raise normal children. He saw his parents as an anti-example that should not be repeated under any circumstances. Christine never took illegal substances, disliked alcohol, and avoided loud parties. She shunned dubious companies and everything related to criminality. Before giving birth, she fully focused on impending motherhood. However, she thought ahead. She didn't want to be a burden on her parents and wanted to be financially independent from them. Christine wanted to try her hand at various fields to then choose the most promising direction. So, she enrolled in bartending school and then intended to attend nursing school. Unfortunately, all these ambitious ideas were doomed to fail. On the evening of December 19, 2007, 19-year-old Christine wanted to bake Christmas cookies with her mother Deborah. It was a family tradition to bake her grandmother's typical cookie recipe every New Year's Eve. Christine planned to return by evening to do so, and in the afternoon she set off for her own business. Her mother stayed at home with her husband and adult children, waiting for her daughter's return. Evening came, but she still wasn't there. They tried calling Christine but couldn't reach her. Her mother was worried but wanted to give her daughter a little more time. Perhaps she was delayed for a good reason and would soon return. Deborah had no idea that while she was worrying and trying to call Christine, about half an hour from their home, around 8 p.m., an emergency call center received a report from a man. A passerby reported that a vehicle was on fire in the alley near his house. The man initially only called to report the burning car, but then became interested in what was happening and looked more closely. Just a few minutes after the first call, a second call came in. According to the same witness, there was a person inside the car. When firefighters and police arrived at the scene, it was already too late. Inside the cabin was the charred body of a person. The face was not heavily damaged, making it obvious that a woman had died. Additionally, ligature marks from a foreign object were visible on the neck, and there were hemorrhages in the eyes, indicating prolonged and very strong compression of the neck. Officers noted that the victim was not wearing a jacket or shoes. Although it was cold in Minnesota on December 19, this seemed strange, as one could simply freeze to death without warm clothing. Against this background, the police assumed that the victim had died elsewhere and the car with the body had been brought there to set it on fire and cover up the evidence of the crime. During the examination of the burned car, fire experts concluded that the fire had started in the back seat. An almost completely burned phone book was found there. During the search of the car, a wallet was found containing a driver's license issued in the name of Christine Larson. It also contained a photo of her and her son. A child seat was left in the back seat. It was empty. This alarmed the police officers. It was not known what had happened to the baby. The police officers believed that it could be in danger. The man who had reported the burning car to emergency services came out to speak with investigators. The car was parked a few dozen meters from his garden, but neither he nor his wife had any idea what kind of vehicle it was. Thanks to their information, however, it was possible to clarify the time frame. Judging by the couple's statements, the car appeared here around 7:30 p.m. The car and the body were taken for examination. It was determined that Christine had died as a result of strangulation. Apparently, the young mother was struck on the head with a blunt object, after which some kind of cord or wire was wrapped around her neck and she was then strangled. It was obvious that this was a brutal, premeditated murder, and burning the car was intended to obscure the traces and hinder the investigation. While all this was happening, the deceased's family was still at home, wondering why Christine had not returned. Her mother was still waiting for her daughter to help her bake cookies. Her father, Daniel, however, tried to calm everyone. He convinced his wife and reminded her that Christine was a 19-year-old woman who wanted to go out and have fun. Above all, she was a very energetic and quite spontaneous person. So they turned on the television and sat down to watch a movie, believing their daughter was spending time with her friends. Since both had to go to work in the morning, the couple decided to forego baking that evening and do it later. However, when the Larsons turned on the television before going to bed and saw the news, they saw a report that a young woman had been found dead in a burning car. They didn't even consider that it might have been Christine. Deborah and Daniel looked at each other and almost unanimously thought how terrible it was to be the parents of the young woman who had died in such a cruel manner. With these thoughts in mind, they turned off the television and went to bed. Around in the morning, there was a knock at the Larsons' door. When the couple opened the door, police officers from the Minneapolis Police Department were standing there. The entire team made their way into the kitchen, where an officer informed the parents of the tragic news. Another unpleasant piece of news for them was the disappearance of the deceased son, Darren. The police had hoped to find the child at Christine's parents' house, but he was indeed not there. No one had the slightest idea where the child was at the moment. He had been visiting his father's house during the day. The police called Zachary. To everyone's relief, it turned out that his son was with him. The young father didn't understand why he was being disturbed so late and thought it might be about Christine. He said they had planned to meet that day and go shopping together, but she had disappeared and simply ignored all his calls. Consequently, Z spent the day with Darren and went to bed confused. When Deborah now delivered the terrible news to him over the phone, he burst into hysterical crying. Zachary managed to calm down. The deceased's mother invited him and the child to stay with her. During this time, they wanted to unite to better cope with the consequences of this terrible tragedy. The young man immediately agreed. The police wanted to speak with the deceased's parents to clarify the circumstances of the last days of Christine's life. The couple immediately provided interesting information. As it turned out, Zachary and Christine had separated 2 months before these events. They maintained a cordial relationship for the sake of the child, continued to communicate as friends, but did not live together. This happened about 2 months before the tragedy. However, Christine's parents still considered Zachary part of the family. Firstly, he was the father of their grandson and wanted to be fully involved in the child's life. Secondly, he never gave up hope of getting Christine back. They said that the young parents lived in the family home for quite some time. Eventually, they decided to move to St. Paul's. The couple rented an apartment about 15 minutes away. After the move, however, the parents noticed that Christine was not very happy with her family life. Z was drawn to parties and entertainment, but that did not align with the young mother's ideas. Despite her modern and active lifestyle, Christine now wanted a domestic environment, peace and quiet to focus on the baby. She didn't like that her boyfriend saw things differently. He wasn't on the same wavelength as her. He was constantly on the go. He could leave Christine with the baby in the middle of the night. Therefore, after a few months, she decided to separate and return to the family home. According to Deborah, she last saw her daughter on that fateful day, December 19, around 1 p.m. She had plans until the evening. First, Christine wanted to drop off her friend Marcella, drive to the gas station, and then meet Zachary, go for a walk, and pick up her 2-year-old child. This was valuable information. The police went directly to the gas station where she planned to meet her friend and fill up her car. The video footage was seized and Christine was quickly found on it. Everything seemed calm. She went into the store and even joked with the salesperson, met her friend Marcella, and was obviously in good spirits. Nothing compromising or disturbing was visible on the camera recordings. It was now decided to meet Zachary. On the morning of December 20, 2007, the young man voluntarily came to the station for a routine contact. He admitted that Christine had not even come to him. He recounted that they had a close relationship, solidified by the child. Zachary still maintained a cordial relationship with the murdered woman and her family. Furthermore, Darren's biological father admitted that they still loved each other and therefore often spent time together. The two supposedly considered it possible to get back together in the future. But at that point, Christine no longer wanted to observe her boyfriend's party lifestyle. She wanted to focus on herself and her son. Zachary admitted that his fondness for parties with his friends made him appear unstable in his beloved's eyes. But he was so relaxed after his hard work, that was the reason for the separation. Nevertheless, they continued to maintain a rather loving relationship. This contradicted the statements of the victim's parents. They never said anything about Christine and Z wanting to resume their life together. Even on his social media page, the boyfriend noted that they were married, although they had never officially tied the knot. Christine repeatedly asked him to remove this tag, but he refused, hoping they would rekindle the relationship and actually get married. The young man also revealed that he and the deceased had shared plans for December 19. She was supposed to pick up her son around 2 p.m. All three wanted to go Christmas shopping. The couple also wanted to stop by the Christmas festival so the baby could experience everything. He was not even 2 years old yet. Although he was still too young and probably didn't understand anything, Zachary called his girlfriend at 2:20 p.m. then a few more times, but Christine ignored him. Z then decided to take the bus with his son and go to the festival alone. He believed that Christine would call and come along once she showed up. The young man didn't want to waste any time. Around 3 p.m. he made this decision. He picked up the child and they set off together. The son and his father arrived at the festival around 4 p.m. They only stayed there for about an hour. Firstly, the noise bothered the baby, and Zachary didn't want to disturb him at night. Secondly, he didn't want to stay there long without Christine's company, and she hadn't contacted him. Thirdly, he believed that by then she might have returned for the baby and was waiting for him. When he returned home, according to the young man, no one was there. According to his statements, he spent the rest of the evening and night there until he received the disturbing call from his beloved's family. The man's alibi was quickly confirmed, as there were special registration forms at the festival that had to be signed upon arrival. Upon checking, Zacharias's signature was found. Furthermore, several witnesses were found who confirmed that they had seen the young father and his child at the event. Although he managed to become the main suspect, he was immediately removed from the list. After the news of Christine's murder, he wrote on his social media page that he missed her and would do everything for his son to ensure the boy smiled as the deceased would have wanted. While investigators visited the festival and confirmed Zacharias's words, a new possible lead was found, reported by friends of the deceased. According to them, Christine had recently met a new young man named Derek shortly before her death. Investigators checked the man's alibi and decided to contact Derek and arrange a meeting with him at the station. However, it was not possible to reach the young man. Consequently, the police began searching for him more actively as it looked suspicious. It turned out that he had not come to work on December 20, the day after Christine's death. Everyone who knew him had not seen him since that day, which seemed an even stranger coincidence. He neither showed up for his work shift nor responded to calls. Technically, the young man had therefore disappeared. A lot of fuss was made, and it worked. Already on December 21, with the help of Derek's friends, it was possible to reach him and even make contact with the young man to persuade him to voluntarily speak at the station. According to the man's confession, he saw his girlfriend on December 19 at 2:15 p.m. According to him, he was on St. Paul Park Street near his apartment when she drove past. As it turned out, his apartment was within walking distance of Zacharias' apartment. According to the timeline reconstructed by her, Christine was on her way to her ex's house to pick up the baby. Derek waved to her and she stopped. Christine confirmed that she was indeed on her way to pick up Darren. They spoke briefly about their upcoming meeting and decided they could meet later that evening or the next day. Christine then drove off and promised to call him but simply never contacted him again. In his opinion, there was nothing unusual in her behavior or demeanor. She was looking forward to the upcoming holidays with her family and was, as always, in good spirits. The police believed Derek. He behaved calmly, appeared confident, answered questions clearly, and aroused no suspicion. The man's statements were confirmed after surveillance tapes from one of the houses had been checked. He accurately described the meeting with her and then genuinely left without appearing suspicious. Derek explained his strange disappearance from work by saying he had taken time off. His superiors had also confirmed this. Only the original explanation had been lost. Nevertheless, the situation confused investigators. They didn't want to write off the man and miss the last lead. Judging by the time intervals the young man had provided, Derek was the last person to have seen Christine alive. This placed him at the top of the list of murder suspects. They managed to obtain search warrants, including one to check the boyfriend's phone records. As much as the police tried to link the victim's new boyfriend to the crime, they couldn't. They were in different places all day, met for only 5 minutes, and then parted ways. The investigators simply didn't have enough information, however. They noticed that there was a highway near the burning car with the body. Along the highway, there were numerous surveillance cameras and checkpoints. Officers decided to use this to try to capture the moment the victim was driven there in her car and set on fire. When this failed, they decided to look for violations or inappropriate driving on December 19. It turned out that an unidentified man contacted emergency services that night. He reported reckless driving and described an unknown man driving on the highway from Minneapolis towards St. Paul Park. According to the description, the driver looked like an old acquaintance of the investigators, but not Derek but Zachariah. Investigators were once again confused about Christine's ex-boyfriend and now decided to check his phone records. They managed to find out that his initial words were a lie. Instead of being home all night with the baby, he was on the state highway between St. Paul and Minneapolis. The police knew that the main suspect was staying with the victim's parents at their invitation during this time. This provided a good opportunity to search the young man's apartment in his absence. The first thing that caught the investigators' attention were the numerous phone books that Zachary, for some reason, kept in his apartment. They were identical to those found in the back seat of the burned car. A few people kept such a quantity of these books, and the coincidence seemed strange. In addition, blood splatter-like stains were found on one of the corridor walls. A luminol test confirmed that it was indeed blood. More stains were found with luminol. During the examination of the bedroom, splatters were also found on Zacharias's mattress. The entire apartment was subjected to this test, and it turned out that there were many areas with suspicious blood traces. The most interesting piece of evidence, however, was a 4-page letter that was clearly addressed to Christine but was never given to her. In it, he described in vivid detail how much he missed his relationship with her and wanted her back. This was in stark contrast to his original statement that they intended to move in together. Subsequently, he claimed he supported Christine and was happy she had a boyfriend. That was a blatant lie. He had suffered from the separation and was therefore perhaps jealous when he learned about Derek. In reality, he wanted her back from the beginning. The couple's relationship was not that simple. They often argued, sometimes the neighbors even called the police, but it never came to violence. Christine's parents knew about the heated arguments, but they did not consider Z dangerous. The next important find was a pair of shoes discovered in Zach's closet. They matched Christine's description. Interestingly, one of the shoes was missing a shoelace. Investigators concluded that this was the shoe whose shoelace the perpetrator might have used to strangle the young woman. While investigators awaited the results of the DNA tests, they contacted the deceased's family as they considered it important to keep them informed of their findings. It was possible that the Larsons were in mortal danger at that moment, as they were living under the same roof as the suspect. When the police informed Daniel and Deborah about this, the boyfriend was just a few meters away from them, on the other side of the wall in his room. The murdered woman's parents struggled to cope with the situation but decided to help the police. After the call, they approached him and told him that the police wanted to speak with him again. The parents showed all possible restraint and composure so as not to betray the investigators' true intentions. When Zachary received this news, he was very upset from the beginning. The young man stated that he absolutely wanted the investigation to be finally concluded and the perpetrator found. Within an hour, he was on his way to the police station. It was clear from the start that he would not be treated as a witness. Z found himself in an interrogation room. The police were quite strict with him because he repeatedly insisted on his version of events. He kept saying he had been at the festival and had a solid alibi. But the investigators said they knew he was lying and wanted to hear the truth. According to the investigators, they invited him for questioning because they realized his story was partially fabricated. They didn't lay all their cards on the table, hoping that the suspect would betray himself with contradictory excuses. All this went on for about 3 hours. When they realized that this tactic yielded nothing, they pulled out the letter they had found in the apartment, which was addressed to Christine. They decided to put pressure on him as the ex-boyfriend had told her how much he loved her. The letter contradicted the young man's story. He began to justify himself again but noticeably lost confidence. Playing with the main suspect's emotions had managed to break him. Finally, Z decided to tell a new, but this time true version of the story. However, it was not what investigators expected to hear. According to Zachariah, he had gone to the store shortly before 2 p.m. hoping to arrive before his beloved. When he returned with his son, he found Christine lifeless in the living room closet. the same place where the police found the shoes during their search. At the same time, Z said that he was so frightened when he discovered her that he decided to hide the body. He didn't want to get into trouble with the law, but he knew they wouldn't believe his story. The best thing he could think of was to drive the deceased in a car to the outskirts of town and set it on fire there. According to Z, he did exactly that and then simply drove away, after which he walked more than 10 km back to his apartment. During all this time, little Darren was left unsupervised in his house. According to the perpetrator, he didn't even set the car with the body on fire, so he doesn't know what or how things continued after he moved towards the house. Of course, none of this sounded plausible at all. His story didn't even include that he had gone to the festival with the boy, so it was a blatant lie. From the main suspect's words, it was clear that he was not involved in any of the events, but for some reason, he appeared at all stages of the massacre and the subsequent actions related to confusing the investigation. Of course, this was not a full confession, but the police now believed they could more accurately reconstruct the chronology of events from December 19, 2007. According to the investigators, Christine had indeed arrived at her ex's apartment after speaking with her new boyfriend between 2:15 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. It was assumed that Zachary wanted to talk to her about rekindling their relationship, but everyone knew that the young mother had no intention of doing so and had even met with the new boyfriend. Z probably didn't know about Derek, but Christine confessed the new relationship to him, which triggered a jealous rage. Only the perpetrator himself could provide more details, but he wouldn't budge. In any case, a conflict arose between the young people, leading to murder. All of this happened in front of their son, but he was too young to understand anything at all. To create an alibi, Zachary subsequently took Darren and drove him by bus to the Christmas festival. He simply left the body of his beloved in the apartment. When he returned, he left the child alone, but took the body with him and decided to find a place where he could abandon Christine's car and erase his tracks. The arson was planned in advance, otherwise, the perpetrator would not have taken one of his bulky phone books from the house. Although the fire was provoked, it did not have as strong an effect as Z had planned, and enough traces of the crime were found on the body. Forensic evidence showed that the blood in his apartment belonged to Christine. The shoelaces were the murder weapon, and his DNA samples were found in Christine's car. On December 24 of the same year, Christmas Eve, the man was formally arrested and charged with the murder of Christine Larson. A little less than a year passed. In October 2008, a jury found Z guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The deceased child was then handed over to Christine's parents. They raised him as their son. Strangely, even Christine's former boyfriend, with whom she was briefly together, played quite an important role in the child's life. He regularly interacted with him and wanted with all his might to remind him what a wonderful person his mother was. Despite the short relationship, Derek considered Christine a beautiful woman and grieved for her greatly. He wanted Darren to never forget his mother under any circumstances. Zachary is still behind bars. He has never confessed to the murder and insists that he was framed. For this reason, it is impossible to accurately reconstruct what Christine experienced before her death and also to learn the motive for the crime. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with its dissemination. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video further. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Thanks for watching and take care. In May, Spanish police received a disturbing call from a quiet neighborhood in Malaga. The body of a young woman with multiple stab wounds was found in an apartment. The suspect vanished but was arrested a few hours later in a nearby cafe. This tragedy, however, is only the beginning of a chain of events that leads investigators to a case that has been unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of one of the apartments, something is hidden that shocks even the most experienced forensic investigators. In 2011, Sibora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Romeo in the Spanish neighborhood of Laura. At first glance, their life seemed stable. Sibora had a job as a waitress in a local restaurant and Marco worked as a chef. They rented a small house and Sibora regularly called her mother Elisabetha, assuring her that she was fine. Behind this facade of apparent well-being, however, serious problems were hidden, becoming more apparent with each passing month. When Elisabetha traveled to Spain to visit her daughter, she immediately noticed the tense atmosphere in the house. Even in her presence, arguments broke out between Sibora and Marco. Elisabetha saw how her daughter tried to justify the outbursts of jealousy and tension as temporary difficulties. The mother, however, was sure that these were not just domestic problems. It was hard to believe that Sibora was a completely different person just 2 years earlier. She was born on September 14, 1991 in Tirana, Albania, and had been a cheerful person since childhood. After her parents' divorce, her mother Elizabeth moved with the children to Italy, where they started a new life. In Rome, Sibora quickly won the sympathy of others. Her nickname Chibai, given to her by her classmates, highlighted her vivacity and joy for life. Despite financial hardship, Sibora was eager to contribute to her family's upkeep from an early age. She took a job as a waitress in a local restaurant but never gave up on her dreams. Her natural beauty, slender figure, and winning a regional beauty pageant opened the way for her into the world of fashion. But despite her success, her biggest dream was to work as a teacher because Sibora loved children above all else. The change began when Sibora turned 18. In a cafe, she met Marco, a 30-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. When she met him, Sibora knew little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed focused on starting a new life. This appearance, however, concealed his complicated past. Marco was known for his aggressive temperament and problems with illegal substances, which had brought him to the attention of the police more than once. Sibora, fascinated by his charisma, paid no attention to this. After a year of relationship, Marco suggested that Sibora move to Spain as there were not enough job opportunities in Italy. Elisabetha tried to dissuade her daughter, doubting the sincerity of Marco's intentions, but Sibora insisted. She believed that this step would be the beginning of a new chapter in which she and Marco could build a happy life. In Spain, things initially looked promising. Sibora quickly found a job as a waitress, and Marco got a job as a pizzaiolo. They rented a cozy house and Sibora told her mother about her plans, but the stability was short-lived. Marco lost one job after another and blamed his employers. His irritability and jealousy became increasingly evident. He showed increasingly aggressive behavior, initially in small things that gradually escalated into serious problems. Elizabeth, who had traveled to Spain to see for herself how her daughter was living, was shocked by what she saw. Sibora, who had always been cheerful and confident, now seemed depressed. Marco did not hide his irritability even in her mother's presence. The arguments grew louder, and Sibora continued to defend Marco despite the obvious problems, assuring her mother that everything would get better. What exactly led Sibora to ignore the warning signs was a mystery to her loved ones. She probably sought in Marco the support and stability that she lacked in her youth. The family, who had moved from Albania to Italy, went through difficult times. Elisabetha worked hard to give her children a chance at a better life, but Sibora was confronted with the need to take responsibility early on. Her relationship with Marco may have been an attempt to fill this void, but instead it led to even more tension. In July 2014, Sibora Gagani suddenly disappeared, leaving her family worried. The last time she exchanged messages with Marco, her former partner, was on July 7. After that, her phone was switched off and all social media accounts were inactive. This was strange and untypical behavior for her. Sibora had previously told her mother that she had finally ended her relationship with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt free. She even described her feelings as being like a butterfly just emerging from its cocoon. But her sudden silence made everyone take notice. The situation began to take an even stranger turn when Marco suddenly appeared at her mother's house in Italy. He tried to give the impression of a worried man who was sorry about what had happened. Over a cup of coffee, he told Elizabeth that he didn't understand where Sibora had gone. He said they had argued before she disappeared, and she had left, leaving all her belongings behind. Later, he changed his version, saying that a security guard in their residential complex had allegedly seen Sibora leaving with 2 suitcases. These contradictory statements raised doubts and increased the unrest. Elisabetta remembered that Sibora had told her a month earlier about her decision to end the relationship. After 3 years of trying to save the relationship, she had moved out of Marco's house and begun to rebuild her life. Sibora tried to keep her distance from her former partner, but this apparently did not deter him. Marco continued to take an active interest in her life. In early July, he called Elisabetta out of the blue, asking if Sibora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to her, especially against the backdrop of their separation. Sibora had repeatedly tried to end the relationship with Marco. In 2013, she even returned to her mother's house in Italy, determined to leave everything behind. At that time, she admitted that she no longer saw any point in the relationship. Marco, however, was not deterred. He appeared at her house, assured Sibora that he would change, and even proposed marriage. Sibora, tired of arguing, once again gave in to his promises, but soon it happened again. Jealousy, control, and violence began to destroy her life again. One day, as she confessed to her mother that she literally had to disappear if she wanted to leave him forever, as Marco would otherwise never leave her alone. In the following months, Sibora came to Italy more frequently, presumably because her residence permit in Spain had expired. Elisabetta noticed that her daughter seemed increasingly frightened, but Sibora rarely provided details. She only said that she was trying to find a way out of this situation. In June 2014, Sibora moved into a new apartment and tried to make a new start. She told her mother that she would not return to Marco. For a short time, this gave her a feeling of freedom, but the fear for her safety remained. When Marco announced that Sibora had left, leaving all her belongings behind, the family immediately realized that this was not her way. She would never give up the bond with her loved ones, especially her mother and brothers. Now the family was in anxious anticipation. They hoped that Sibora had indeed decided to go underground to finally free herself from Marco's control. But the contradictory versions of events and the absence of any news from her raised more and more questions. In 2015, the investigation into Sibora Gagani's disappearance, despite the efforts of her family and the police, was still not closed. Elizabeth, her mother, was the initiator of an official appeal to the law enforcement authorities. She insisted that Marco, Sibora's former partner, might have something to do with her disappearance, as he was the last person to see her before she vanished. His behavior, however, raised more and more questions. When questioned, Marco repeated his version. Sibora had allegedly left the house after an argument, taking only a few things. Her personal belongings, including clothes and documents, however, remained in the house, which seemed strange. Despite his claims, Marco did not report her missing to the police. He claimed he had tried to find Sibora on his own by printing flyers and putting them up in the neighborhood where they lived. He also made various assumptions about her whereabouts. She might have gone to Argentina, or she was seen with an unknown man with whom there was allegedly a conflict. These statements, however, were contradictory and not supported by facts. Elizabeth, who did not trust Marco, made her own efforts to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a special organization that disseminated information about missing persons. Pictures of Ciborra and appeals for help appeared in Italian and Spanish newspapers. Nevertheless, no new leads were found. While Ciborra's family continued to fight for her fate, Marco lived a life that looked completely normal to outsiders. He changed his appearance. He shaved his hair and grew a beard. He tried not to draw too much attention to himself, but his behavior raised questions. During this time, he started new relationships, but both affairs ended with the women complaining about his aggressiveness. Nevertheless, he continued to live in Spain, went to the gym regularly, and joined a shooting club, which alarmed those familiar with his past. Ciborra's family did not give up the search. Elizabeth repeatedly appealed to the police to intensify the investigation. At the same time, law enforcement officers began to review the case files to find new clues. They checked Marco's statement, which seemed contradictory from the beginning. The statement that Ciborra had left the house with suitcases contradicted his statement. She left the house without her belongings. In addition, the question arose as to why he had not tried to involve the police immediately after her disappearance. In the meantime, public attention to Ciborra's case, despite her family's efforts, gradually waned. Marco, who remained in Spain, seemed to get used to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed like a friendly man who played sports and socialized with his fellow human beings. His former relationship with Ciborra and the complaints of his new partners, however, continued to cast a shadow on his image. While Ciborra's family hoped for news, the investigation stalled further. Law enforcement agencies began to expand the investigation, also consulting international databases for missing persons. But even that yielded no results, and for Ciborra's relatives, the uncertainty remained the hardest to bear. In 2023, Marco had managed to completely change his life. At first glance, he lived with a new partner named Paula, and they had a child together. But behind the facade of this new life, the same problems that had haunted him for years were hidden. The relationship with Paula could not be described as stable. Again and again, she told people close to her that she was physically abused by Marco. He, in turn, could not find work, which only worsened the situation. When Marco worked in a pizzeria, he met Victor Melina, the owner of the restaurant, who later offered him and Paula a job. Victor also rented the couple a small apartment, hoping to improve their difficult financial situation. In contrast to Marco, Paula quickly gained trust and respect at work. Victor and his sister Victoria, who also worked at the restaurant, became not only employers but also supported her. Over time, Victoria learned more about the complexity of Paula and Marco's relationship. After an incident, she openly advised Paula to go to the police. In her opinion, Marco was becoming increasingly aggressive at work and also offered no support at home. One day, an incident occurred in the restaurant that left Victor speechless. The door to the staff toilet was broken. Victoria learned that Marco had done this, accusing her of allegedly using the room for meetings with colleagues. Marco was then relocated to another place under Victor's supervision. Despite her hard work and her attempts to give the impression of a normal life, Paula could not hide the complexity of her situation. Her trust in Victoria allowed her to reveal further details from her life. She admitted that she only continued to live with Marco because this was the only way to regain custody of her children, who had been taken away by the authorities due to illegal substances found in the house. The substances belonged to Marco, but the consequences affected the entire family. For Paula, it became a personal tragedy. Her main goal was to save enough money to separate from Marco and regain the rights to the children. In the meantime, Marco's situation worsened more and more. He often complained to Victor about his poor financial situation and claimed that he only continued to work for the sake of his family. but neither his actions nor his behavior confirmed this. His aggressiveness at work and his inability to get along with his colleagues led Victor to seriously question whether he should continue to work with him. At the same time, Victoria, who saw how difficult Paula's situation was, tried to convince her not to tolerate violence. Since Paula feared for her safety, she preferred not to engage in open conflict. She said that Marco had once hit and kicked her 4 times, but played down the severity of the incident. For Victoria and Victor, this was confirmation that her situation required intervention. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula spent her day off in high spirits, making plans for the evening. She told her colleagues that she wanted to relax and spend her time in a relaxing and rewarding way. The next day, May 17, Victoria expected her colleague and friend and wanted to know how her evening had gone. But events began to unfold differently. On the morning of May 17, loud shouting broke out in the apartment Paula shared with Marco at around 11:30 a.m. This was nothing unusual. Arguments between the two were frequent. This time, however, it sounded much more serious. Paula's voice was clearly audible. She called for help. The screams were so loud that Victor, Paula's landlord and employer, heard them. Together with another restaurant employee, he rushed to the scene. When they reached the apartment door, the men began to knock and loudly ask what was wrong. A soft sobbing could be heard from inside the apartment, which then fell silent. After a few seconds, Marco opened the door. His voice was calm and he assured them that everything was fine. According to him, Paula had allegedly just gone to bed and calmed down. However, her voice could no longer be heard, which made Victor very suspicious. Adding to the problem was that Marco had been fired by Victor from the restaurant only a few days earlier, after a series of incidents, including a missing kitchen knife. Marco's dismissal was the last straw, as Victor no longer trusted him and wanted to avoid possible conflicts. But now Marco is at the center of a new, disturbing incident. In the meantime, Victor, with the key in hand, went back into the house and tried to get in to find out what had happened. Paula's body lay on the floor in one of the rooms with numerous stab wounds. Her clothes were soaked in blood, and it was clear that death had occurred hours earlier. The police immediately called forensic experts to collect evidence and began searching for Marco, who had by then fled. Paula's body was sent for forensic examination to determine the exact cause of death, and investigators began searching for the suspect. Marco was arrested a few hours later in a local cafe. He sat quietly at a table as if nothing had happened and offered no resistance during the arrest. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic murder, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with the crime, which was committed against the background of gender-based violence, and it was ordered that he undergo a psychiatric evaluation and a test for illegal substances. The court ordered that he be held in pretrial detention without bail. At the hearing, Marco exercised his right to remain silent. Apart from answering questions from his lawyer, he did not mention the disappearance of Sibor, which he had already mentioned earlier in the day. However, it was that name that once again came into the spotlight. It turned out that even before the hearing on May 17, the day of the crime, during the interrogation at the police station, Marco suddenly said he wanted to make a confession in connection with Sibora's case. He said that he had killed her during an argument with Sibora, and had hidden her body in the apartment where they lived together in 2014. Marco even offered to show the exact location where he believed the body was located. Despite his confession, law enforcement authorities decided to postpone their review and focus on Paula's murder case. For Sibora's mother, Elisabetha, the news about Marco and his confession in her daughter's case was a new blow. For 9 years, she had tried to get the investigation reopened, believing that Sibora's disappearance was connected to her partner. After Marco's confession, Sibora Gagani's case was reopened. Investigators wanted to verify his claim and began an examination of the apartment where the two lived in 2014. In early June 2023, Spanish investigators working on the Sibora Gagani case focused on a detailed analysis of the building's floor plan where she had once lived with Marco. A thorough inspection of the apartment that formerly belonged to the couple yielded no results, but a review of the building documents revealed a discrepancy between the actual floor plan of the apartment and the construction plans. This discovery drew their attention to a neighboring twin apartment on the same floor. Attention was drawn to a large room that, according to the plans, should have been in the bedroom of the investigated apartment but was actually missing. With permission, investigators opened the wall in the neighboring apartment in June. Behind it, they found a large wooden box filled with lime. In the box, the police found the first piece of evidence: a plastic bag with a knife covered in dried blood and personal items presumably belonging to Sibora. Among the finds was also a bouquet of withered flowers lying on several plastic bags. In one of the bags, a hiking sleeping bag was found, in which human remains were discovered. The body was sent for forensic examination to determine identity and cause of death. Investigators noted tattoos that matched the description of Sibora in the missing person report. To obtain final confirmation, Spanish authorities asked her family in Italy to provide DNA samples. On June 10, police officers arrived at the home of Elisabetha, Sibora's mother, to take a saliva sample from her. The results of the analysis confirmed the remains indeed belonged to Sibora Gagani. Within a week of the discovery in Spain, new details about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations, he claimed he had used acid to dispose of the body. These claims, however, could not be confirmed. Investigators noted that Marco repeatedly changed his statements. His confessions, made after his arrest for Paula's murder, led to the reopening of the Sibora investigation. In the meantime, investigators continued to work on clarifying the exact circumstances of her death. For Elisabetha, the news that Sibora's body had been found was a shock. 9 years of uncertainty had robbed her of hope, but she continued to wait for news from her daughter. Over the years, her life changed. Sibora's father died of an illness without ever knowing the truth about her fate. And Elisabetha's only joy was the birth of a grandson through her son. After the identity of the remains was officially confirmed, Elisabetha remembered that she had gone to the police hoping that her daughter's case would be solved. These efforts had now led to a result which, however, represented a bitter relief. In parallel, experts continued to analyze the evidence found at the discovery site of the body. A knife found in a bag was sent for forensic examination to search for biological traces that could point to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators worked with their Italian colleagues to complete the investigative file on Sibora's disappearance. Concurrently, the investigation into Paula's murder case continued, in which Marco was already the main suspect. Despite all the evidence and the fact that Marco himself had confessed to the massacre of his ex-girlfriend and even indicated the location where the body was hidden, he subsequently refused to admit his guilt in the Sibora case. His lawyer insisted that his client's statements about the location of the body had been made under duress and could not be used against him. Investigators, however, believed that the evidence found in the box, including Sibora's personal belongings, was sufficient grounds for further charges. In January 2024, months after the discovery of Sibora's remains, her family finally had the opportunity to send her on her last journey. After the completion of the forensic examinations, the body was handed over to her relatives for burial. The ceremony took place in Italy, where Sibora's friends and family could say goodbye to her. In her memory, air balloons with messages symbolizing hope and farewell were released into the sky. At this point, the trial against Marco, who was accused of Paula's murder, was in focus. At a hearing on January 30, 2024, he handed the court a 17-page handwritten letter in which he pleaded guilty, but with numerous reservations. He claimed that the conflict between them was due to frequent arguments over a debt of Euros 50 and his infidelity. According to Marco, he defended himself too strongly during the argument, which led to the tragedy. The investigation, however, revealed that the wounds on Paula's body were on her back, which raised doubts about his words of self-defense. Despite his confession, Marco was not willing to talk in detail about the Ciborra case. He merely confirmed that he had wrapped her body in bags, hidden it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, covered it with lime, and bricked it up. He denied any involvement in her death and tried to justify his actions with fear of the circumstances. During the trial, Marco suddenly changed his statement about Ciborra's death and offered a new version. He stated that the cause of her death was the Albanian mafia with whom he was allegedly connected due to debts. According to him, he had borrowed euros to open a brothel, but the money had been stolen. When he did not repay the debts, 4 men came to his house, one of whom killed Ciborra during an argument. Marco claimed he was forced under threat to his life to dispose of the body to avoid further consequences. This version raised doubts among investigators, as Marco had previously changed his statement. The investigation revealed that since his arrest in May after Paula's murder, he had confused investigators with lies. His claims about the mafia also did not match any of the evidence collected. The cause of Ciborra's death was determined after the autopsy. Multiple stab wounds, which despite the condition of the body clearly indicated a violent crime. Ciborra's family received confirmation of her death years after she was reported missing. Elizabeth, her mother, said she had lived with the hope of finding out the truth in recent years, even though her father could never experience this moment. In May 2024, Paula's trial was not yet concluded. The court ordered jury proceedings. The case of Ciborra Gagani was reopened but not yet heard. Investigators continued to review Marco's statements, including his claim of involvement with the mafia, and awaited new proceedings. The story of Ciborra Gagani and Paula shows how destructive relationships built on violence and manipulation can have tragic consequences. Ciborra, who dreamed of the future, and Paula, who tried to regain control of her life, were both victimized by the same man. Their fates show how important it is to recognize the signs of violence in time and intervene to prevent further tragedies. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with dissemination. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video further. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care.
Sometimes a chance encounter decides fate. This is how you can find a person for life, or it can lead to problems, sometimes so serious that they can lead to death. This case occurred in 2020. An investigating detective was confronted with a scene so bloody that it was the most terrifying memory in 32 years of police experience. The deceased was Alyssa Burkett. When police officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy, the victim's relatives were already there. They spoke with the authorities and provided the first valuable clues for the investigation. According to Alyssa's sister and mother, there was only one person in her life capable of murder. In the months after the massacre, the deceased appeared to her mother in dreams. Almost every night she saw her at the other end of the room when she fell asleep. The woman knew exactly that her daughter was dead, but she was happy to see her. When the mother was first confronted with the dream, she assumed her daughter had returned. However, Alyssa said she would not return under any circumstances as she was very afraid for her life. 24-year-old Alyssa lived in Ralton, Texas, USA near Dallas. She worked there and also raised her daughter. According to witness statements, she drove into the parking lot near her workplace on October 2, 2020 at 9 a.m. She parked her vehicle in a familiar spot, a black Ford Expedition SUV, which the office workers saw for the first time had been parked there since early morning. When Alyssa first stopped, a dark-skinned man got out of the vehicle. In his hand he held something suspicious. As it turned out, it was a pistol. The perpetrator positioned himself in front of the hood of Alyssa's car and shot her through the windshield. When the next witnesses became aware of the sound, the perpetrator had already gotten into his SUV and began backing out of the parking lot. Alyssa got out of her car at that moment. She was alive, but she was seriously injured. Her left eye was almost destroyed and the left side of her face was severely damaged. Alyssa wanted to call for help. Unfortunately, she got out of her car too early because the attacker's car stopped abruptly. He drove past her. At that moment, the dark-skinned man who had previously fired the shot got out of the car again. This time he had a large knife in his hand. Alyssa was barely on her feet when he dealt one stab after another. Despite her injuries, she still had the strength to fight. The young woman tried to defend herself against her attacker, but that only made the situation worse. Unfortunately, she had to defend herself alone, as the people around her were simply afraid to approach the madman with a weapon in hand. They feared he might open fire again or stab them. All this happened directly under the windows of the real estate offices where the victim worked. There were many witnesses who observed the events. Since she could not get help, Alyssa collapsed. The dark-skinned man jumped into his car and drove away. Alyssa suffered serious injuries but was still alive. As the perpetrator fled, colleagues came out and tried to help her. They were shocked that Alyssa was attacked in broad daylight in a public place with such brutality. Her colleagues called for help while the attack was still in progress. The perpetrator had barely had time to drive away from the parking lot when the sirens sounded and the emergency services arrived at the scene. The ambulance was the first to arrive at the scene. They tried to help the victim, but it was too late. The young mother was dead. She had not waited for the paramedics to arrive due to the heavy bleeding. In total, she had a gunshot wound to the eye and 44 stab wounds all over her body. The victim's mother immediately responded to a call from her daughter's colleague. She was even faster at the scene than the police officers. The woman provided the first valuable information. In her opinion, the only person who had a motive was her ex-boyfriend, 33-year-old Andrew Beard. For months, they had been fighting for custody of their shared 1-year-old daughter Willow. The heat of passion during this process was very serious, even to the point of threats. The fight began when Alyssa was pregnant. One day she spontaneously asked her best friend how she could get full custody of her child immediately after birth. The woman said that Andrew initially wanted to achieve this, but she did not want to give up her daughter and planned to raise her herself. Alyssa wanted to completely restrict contact with the father as she considered him dangerous, but hoped to achieve child support payments. At some point, Andrew's initiative for sole custody was considered an unlikely threat, but when the child was born, the biological father was seriously concerned about obtaining full custody of the child. He considered the girl's mother too reckless and too dependent for such responsibility. Alyssa and Andrew were completely opposite from the start. He was 9 years older, had achieved great professional success, and worked in a tool factory. At this time, he had built a luxurious house, owned a whole fleet of vehicles, and even his own airplane. When I met the young people, Alyssa was 22 years old. She was a student who had just started to build a life for herself. Due to her age, she was still quite carefree in many things. They met through a dating site. It was a short romance, nothing serious. Everything changed dramatically when Alyssa found out she was pregnant. During this time, she lived with her friend M, who remembered the exact moment the baby was announced. Alyssa stood crying in the bathroom, and when her friend came to her, she silently handed her a positive pregnancy test. But what started as slight excitement before motherhood gradually turned into anxiety, especially when she learned that she was pregnant with a girl. On July 23, 2019, she gave birth to a daughter named Willow. Her fears about motherhood had completely disappeared. She was ready to be the best mother for her daughter, and she was really good at it. When she realized that she would now be a single mother, she went back to college and quickly completed her studies as she had previously dropped out in her final year. She now had a major. Alyssa quickly found a good job. She became an assistant property manager, willingly began building her career, and continued to live for her child. The young mother had always hoped to build a better future for Willow. Andrew, on the other hand, had not had financial problems for a long time. He was wealthy and could buy everything he needed for the child. The man said he wanted sole custody to give his daughter a carefree life, but Alyssa believed it had to do with him wanting to hurt her. Honestly, she didn't quite understand why her ex was fulfilled. It seemed that they had separated peacefully and could resolve all problems peacefully. In the initial phase, the man only had the right to see her once a week. He could take his daughter for a few days, mostly weekends. Andrew was obviously very unhappy about having to drive his daughter back and forth. He initiated a lawsuit that became a big problem for Alyssa. Despite her efforts, court costs constantly drained her bank account. There was barely enough money left to make ends meet. She knew it would be very difficult to win this fight because her opponent was an established man who had the money, the best lawyers, and everything to win. She had none of that, but she didn't want to give up. Unfortunately for Alyssa, her former chosen one turned out to be a man who hardly noticed the word no and generally could not accept such an answer. Alyssa's mother was shocked to discover that her father simply regarded Willow as his property and did not even want to share her with her own mother. Suddenly, in March 2020, when Willow was 8 months old, the warring parents were able to agree. They agreed on both visitation rights and financial support. Things seemed to have calmed down. Alyssa had no idea that a true storm was brewing. In late spring 2020, the bitter custody battle was over. The parents strictly adhered to the given schedules. The young mother had a new boyfriend named Ben, and Andrew was interested in a girl named Holly. Their former differences seemed to have become indifferent to them. Initially, everything seemed peaceful. The child was well treated by both families. Holly had even contacted Alyssa and written to her that she expected a healthy relationship between her lover Andrew, and Willow. That seemed like a good sign, contrary to expectations. However, the relationship suddenly and very noticeably deteriorated during this time. The reason for this was a small conflict that arose when Andrew did not return his daughter on time. From that moment on, the man became hostile, again demanded sole custody, and threatened a second lawsuit. From this point on, Andrew began to behave very rudely. During the summer, Alyssa had the uncomfortable feeling that she was constantly being watched by someone. She began telling family members, some friends and colleagues about it. She didn't know what to do. Andrew always seemed to know where his ex was. The man could spontaneously appear anywhere and stalk either his daughter or her mother. Alyssa had no idea how he could have gotten her data. She carefully checked her car, her computer, and her cell phone, but to no avail. She had almost become paranoid. She literally looked over her shoulder whenever she was on the street. This happened for almost a whole year since the girl's birth, which negatively affected Alyssa's mental and physical health. Nevertheless, the young woman continued to save her strength and endured as best she could, hoping that the situation would gradually relax. Appeals to the police did not help. It was as if the applications were ignored, but she believed it was due to the stalker's money. Things didn't seem to be able to get worse. In September 2020, a month before the fatal attack, the situation reached a new level. Suddenly, a man named Frank Maru contacted the emergency services and complained that he had seen with his own eyes Alyssa selling illegal substances from the trunk of her car in a parking lot near her workplace. Police officers responded to the call and approached the woman. At first, she did not understand what they wanted from her, but she complied with the officers' requests and gave them the car keys. When they opened the car, it turned out that there was a weapon, illegal substances, and some cash in the trunk, exactly where the caller had said. Alyssa assured them that she had nothing to do with these things and did not understand how they could be there. After the incident, the young mother feared that she could be arrested and even deprived of her parental rights, not to mention losing her job. She was sure that Andrew had orchestrated the whole thing. Because she was not involved in anything illegal, everyone close to her knew that. Alyssa never appeared in criminal complaints. From the beginning, the young mother insisted that the whole thing was staged to frame her. She cited problems with her ex and numerous stalking allegations. That same evening, she spoke with her friend, who was also her roommate. Alyssa was convinced that after placing illegal substances in the car, an attempted murder could be the next step. Such suspicions are a powerful testament to how frightened she was. Also, during this time, Alyssa had a lot of contact with her sister Madison, who supported her. Alyssa told her about almost every suspicious incident that occurred. Her expectations came true. A month after illegal substances and weapons were planted in her car, Alyssa was brutally attacked in the parking lot before work. Those close to the stalker's victim were sure that this was the last resort Andrew was forced into when the attempt to hand his ex over to the authorities did not work. In fact, she was never arrested or charged due to lack of evidence. It turned out that some perpetrator had hidden illegal substances in her car. Even Andrew's mother said that her son behaved strangely towards Alyssa. His anger and desire to take the child away from her seemed inexplicable. But Alyssa did not believe that Andrew was even capable of violence. The man had always been a warm-hearted and loving person who acted from the heart. Andrew's mother insisted that he was very good with Willow and was a wonderful father. He was very upset that he could barely spend quality time with his child. But could the biological father have organized the crime just to provide stability for his daughter? The deceased's relatives had no doubt. The police went after Andrew Beard, who had been stalking Alyssa in recent months. To the mother's horror, Andrew Beard visited Willow after Alyssa's death and took the girl away from her. The woman feared that the child might be in danger and immediately notified the police. Only a few hours had passed since the murder when police stopped Andrew's white Ford F-150 pickup for an alleged traffic violation. Inside were his fiancée Harley and his daughter, who was in a child seat in the back. The arrested individuals were very calm from the beginning, showed no agitation, and willingly answered all questions from the police officers. They truly seemed unaware of what was happening. Nothing suspicious was found during the vehicle inspection. Andrew and Holly were allowed to drive away with Willow as the visitation rules had been set by the court. The father had not violated them, and the police officers saw no danger to the girl's life. However, it was decided to confiscate the car for investigation. In addition, the entire group was prohibited from returning home as they wanted to search there for evidence of the attack on Alyssa. The couple went to the hotel with the girl. Meanwhile, the investigation team worked in Andrew's villa. As claimed by Alyssa's parents, evidence was found quite quickly in the house. In one of Andrew's backpacks, for example, there was an envelope with compromising texts. Judging by the content, everything that had happened was related to Frank Maru, who had originally called the emergency services a month before Alyssa's death. The note intended for this man contained all the necessary data: model and number of the victim's car, address, personal data. In addition, a special device was found here that contained recordings of conversations with the emergency services. Devices and software were found that made it possible to track Alyssa's cell phone movements. A similar device was attached to her car. This allowed them to determine her location in real time. But the most interesting discovery was made in Andrew's car. There was a bottle of a very dark foundation with which it was possible to disguise his face as African American. They also found hiking boots soaked in bleach. From this point on, there was a connection to the massacre, but a fairly solid one. Neither a weapon nor a knife could be found at the crime scene in the house or in Andrew's pickup. There was only an empty sheath, but it was impossible to say what kind of knife was in it. The next breakthrough came only a day later. It turned out that the black Ford SUV driven by the perpetrator had been bought shortly before the assault. It was found abandoned less than a kilometer from Andrew's house. The murderer was even filmed on surveillance cameras at Andrew's house driving the car. Blood from the deceased was found in the black pickup. In addition, there was another part of the masquerade arranged by the attacker, a false beard with brown foundation, the same one worn by Alyssa's killer. But more importantly, DNA samples of the suspect were found in this car. Andrew was about to be arrested. During this time, he was staying in a rented apartment with his fiancée, his mother, and his daughter Willow. The girl was taken away and handed over to the deceased's mother, and Andrew was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Holly Elkins was the most affected of all. She volunteered to speak with the police officers because she did not understand what was happening. She admitted that she had no idea that the man she was going to marry could be capable of shooting and stabbing someone. The conversation with Holly lasted about an hour. The authorities hoped to gain her as a witness for the prosecution, but she simply refused to believe in Andrew's guilt. At the same time, her fiancé was contacted. From the beginning, he insisted that he had nothing to do with it and claimed he had an alibi for the time the crime occurred. He claimed he had been at his house the whole time, but even the surveillance cameras in his house contradicted him. Andrew lied, which only increased suspicion of his guilt. But Harley also insisted that he was home, which already strengthened the suspicion of her complicity. When the interrogations were over, Andrew and Harley moved into a rented apartment. She claimed he was actually innocent. The man was then arrested but was released on bail 2 weeks later. During this time, the police were very concerned about Willow's safety, as an unregistered suppressor was found during the search of Andrew's apartment. It was suspected that the man could be particularly dangerous and was in possession of an unknown weapon. Although he had posted bail, law enforcement desperately tried to get him back behind bars. Finally, a loophole was found, and Andrew Beard was charged with possession of a dangerous weapon. He was taken into custody, and the police continued their investigation without fear for Willow's fate. A year and 8 months had passed since the crime. Finally, Andrew called his mother from prison to tell her the unimaginable news. He said he wanted to plead guilty because he could no longer hide the truth. All this time, his family had not believed that Andrew was capable of murder, but he was tired of hiding and being afraid. This news was so shocking to his mother that she simply collapsed to the floor powerlessly while on the phone. Andrew decided to confess everything, including the role Holly Elkins had played in the crime. Holly herself went to her hometown of Michigan only 2 weeks after Andrew's arrest and lived her life there. Her friend admitted that Holly had started a new life. She had bought an apartment, acquired a new Lexus, and met a new boyfriend. Up to this point, Holly had been portrayed as a victim or a disturbed woman who was allegedly in shock and pain over Alyssa's death. Now it was clear that this was a carefully planned act and manipulation. Andrew described his ex-fiancée as a very controlling person. Holly had been in control of the relationship from the beginning, which everyone who knew them confirmed. She knew how to manipulate men and always got everything she wanted. When she met Andrew, he had a big problem with Willow. Holly couldn't have children, and after talking to the girl during visits with her father, she became attached to her and wanted her as her property. In her mind, she designed an image of the perfect family and perfect cohabitation. In this image, there was only her, Andrew, and Willow without compromise. Alyssa was just an obstacle in her way. Fortunately, Holly didn't see her any differently from the beginning. Despite all the kind words, she simply hated Alyssa. The more Andrew talked about the events that led to Alyssa's death, the clearer it became that Holly had played as big a role in the attack as the man with the gun. Strangely, even the placement of the illegal substances in the trunk had been Holly's idea. She not only tried to have Alyssa arrested, but also her mother so that she would not try to get custody of the girl. This happened when both women arrived at Andrew's house, complaining that the father had not returned the child at the agreed time. The angry women confronted Harley as she drove past the house in a golf cart. Willow was on her lap. It looked as if they didn't want to give her back. Alyssa's mother snatched her granddaughter, and then they just drove away. But Holly immediately went to the police and said that Alyssa's mother had attacked her from behind, beaten her, and almost killed her when she took the child. As proof, she showed the marks on her back, but it was clear from the beginning that they did not look like beating marks. It looked as if Holly had inflicted these injuries on herself. Although her trick didn't work and the police didn't believe her, the situation only got worse. The perpetrator began looking for new ways to get what she wanted. Holly immediately began pressuring Andrew, saying she wanted a man who had everything under control and not a weakling who couldn't even get full custody of his child. This manipulation worked. Andrew was a successful man, and statements like these deeply hurt him. Just 1 week before the murder, Holly went on vacation to Mexico. On September 25, 2020, she sent her fiancé a short text message expressing her hope that he would definitely get over it, without exactly saying what it was about. Of course, it was about him deciding to eliminate Alyssa. The man visibly hesitated, but his lover insisted. If he didn't do what he intended, she simply wouldn't come back, so Andrew made a decision. When he came back, the first thing Holly demanded was to tell the details of the assault, because she visibly enjoyed it and relished every detail. All this was repeated many times. Even during intimacy, she demanded that her fiancé describe the attack in detail, especially the horror, the screams, and the suffering of Alyssa. After the confession, Andrew was sentenced to 43 years in prison in May 2022. Holly was monitored during this time. It was obvious that she was excited. But since the police seemed to have no interest in her after her ex-fiancé's arrest, the woman gradually calmed down. She lived an ordinary life, unaware that the evidence against her was piling up more and more. In July 2023, 3 years after Alyssa's death, Holly Elkins was arrested at Miami Airport. She was on her way back from a trip to the Dominican Republic. Of course, the woman pleaded not guilty, but she was charged with conspiracy to harass with a dangerous weapon resulting in death. The authorities immediately seized her phone and computer. Forensic examinations supported all of Andrew's statements. As it turned out, Holly even worked with him to buy a knife and ammunition for the weapon and helped him choose the disguise to look like a dark-skinned man. Holly searched the internet for disturbing questions like how to commit the perfect crime, leave no evidence, and get away with it in court. All this, of course, increased suspicion against her. In April, Holly appeared in court as the organizer and mastermind of the plot. The prosecutor insisted that the true monster in this whole situation was not even the man with the gun, but Harley, who was behind him the whole time and pushed him to commit the crime. Without her pressure, the attack would not have happened and Alyssa would still be alive. Her real goal, however, was little Willow. She wanted to possess the child like an object. Anger and an inflated ego consumed Holly so much that she thought it was okay to have the girl's biological mother killed. After the trial, the jury deliberated for only 90 minutes before finding Holly guilty. She was sentenced to 2 life sentences under state law on August 15, 2024. She received an even harsher sentence than Andrew. Finally, Alyssa Burkett's family was able to claim a victory, albeit with a bittersweet taste. Custody of Willow was awarded to Alyssa's family. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with dissemination. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.